conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier.
But the risk is plainly there. We can see Omicron spiking now in London and some other parts of the country.
Well, as the PM says he can't rule out an Omicron lockdown this Christmas, we bring you the professor behind an amazing British breakthrough that could change the way we manage COVID.
Your dyslexia that meant you misread the social distancing rules? No.
Also, the MP who brought you our first lockdown keeps saying sorry, the Brazier angle on why Matt Hancock's ambitions fail the ultimate COVID test. Andrew Doyle will talk you through the latest act of woke madness from the SNP in Edinburgh. This one really does beggar belief. Our special guest tonight, the Archbishop of Jerusalem, on why Britain's mainstream media keep on ignoring the plight of Christians in the Holy Land.
Неприятно об этом говорить. Имеется в виду на машине.
And Tinker Tailor soldier, taxi driver. Russia's president says he moonlighted as a cabbie in the early 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. I'll ask a leading Kremlin watcher why Putin's time on the rank still rankles. And as an American billionaire is named Time magazine's Person of the Year, who do you think has made 2021 worth living through? All that plus tonight's Twitter poll. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. I'm Polly Middlehurst, and here are your latest news headlines on GB News. So the Prime Minister has confirmed at least one patient has died with the Omicron variant of coronavirus in the UK. Earlier on today, the government announced that around 10 people in England had indeed been hospitalised with the new strain.
Sadly, yes, Omicron is producing hospitalisations, and sadly at least one patient has now been confirmed to have died with Omicron. So I think the idea that this is somehow a milder version of the virus, I think that's something we need to set on one side and just recognise the sheer pace at which it accelerates through the population.
Boris Johnson. Well, earlier tonight, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, issued a statement to the nation and urged everybody eligible to get their booster jab.
If you haven't had your first or second jab, now is the time to come forward. It matters more than ever. Getting jabbed, wearing masks, and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
Well, Wales First Minister has announced urgent plans to accelerate the booster programme there. Mark Drayford says the Welsh Government is planning on offering the booster to all eligible adults by the end of the year. This follows Omicron expecting to become the dominant form of the virus in Wales by next month. He explained how important the third jab is to protect against the new variant.
Now, over the weekend, new evidence emerged about the effectiveness of our vaccines against Omicron. 2 doses of the vaccine is simply not enough to give the level of protection against infection we all need. The booster dose is vital.
Meanwhile, the Health Secretary says the new Omicron variant now makes up 20% of all new COVID cases in England. Taking urgent questions in the Commons, Sajid Javid also warned 44% of new cases in London are now the new variant. He also told MPs the UK's Health Security Agency estimates the current number of daily infections are probably around 200,000. There are now over 4,700 confirmed cases of Omicron in the UK. Meanwhile, people trying to order lateral flow tests from the government website have had some difficulty today. They're being told there are no more home testing kits available. However, Boris Johnson says there is a ready supply of lateral flow tests and recommended getting them from shops and also from pharmacies. Now, away from COVID, a US citizen charged with causing Harry Dunn's death by dangerous driving will face a UK court early next year. Anne Sakoulas, the wife of the US diplomat Jonathan Sakoulas, is accused of killing the teenager in a road crash outside the US military base RAF Croughton in Northamptonshire in August 2 years ago. The Crown Prosecution Service say the case will be heard at Westminster Magistrates Court in January. You're up to date. Now back to Brazier.
Well, hello then, a very warm welcome to the show. How much has Omicron occupied your thoughts today? Maybe you've managed to put it out of your mind altogether. Or were you one of the people who perhaps took Boris Johnson at his word last night and tried, perhaps unsuccessfully, to get a booster jab this morning? Today, the website for bookings crashed, queues formed, and the Health Secretary said the new variant will become the dominant one in Britain within weeks. Well, this wretched pandemic is many things, not least a barometer of hopefulness. Pessimists like me fret that it means Christmas is in danger, a mood not helped by the PM refusing today to rule out further restrictions potentially later this month. But if you're an optimist, and goodness we need you now, there are grounds perhaps for hope. Maybe Omicron may yet emerge as a kind of Christmas gift, should it turn out to be responsible for only the mildest of symptoms. Well, in a moment, I'll introduce you to a British invention that may yet turn out to be a diagnostic game changer for COVID. But first, let's talk to Professor David Strain about where we are right now and whether politicians of all stripes are right to warn today of a looming tsunami of dangerous infections. Professor Strain, I really appreciate your time this evening. Thanks for joining us. We are, it seems to me, many people caught in a cleft stick. On the one hand, some of the early data that's come out of South Africa suggesting we ought not to be overly concerned, and a few clinicians saying this may be a mild infection, but that overbearing logic that says it doesn't matter how mild it is, if there are lots of cases, we run the risk of an NHS being overwhelmed. And we're trying to calibrate our personal risk between those 2 points.
Yeah, and that's the position that we're in. And unfortunately, at this moment in time, we just don't have the answer. And although there are many people going doom and gloom, many people saying this could be our saviour, the reality is, from previous waves, it was about 13 to 15 days between diagnosis and contracting it that people started getting sick. On average, it was about 19 days before people started dying of it. And it's actually 19 days today since that this was first described in South Africa. So the fact that we're seeing deaths here in the UK in that shorter time frame means that we may not be getting the hope that we were looking for, that this was going to be the mild version that turns COVID into nothing more than the flu. However, it's important to say it is a single death, and the numbers, we're looking at about 4,000 confirmed cases, which potentially translates to about 200,000 cases within the community. There is still a long way to go before we know for certain whether this is going to be the next worst step or whether this is going to be the virus burning itself out.
David, just on the point about the fatality, I mean, it will feel to some people like semantic dancing on a pin, but it perhaps does matter whether somebody dies with or of this variant.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to remember that every year, every day, thousands of people in the UK will be dying of other conditions. And that's why we're very careful. So the full details of this one particular case haven't been released yet. And I fully appreciate the reasons for that because of the family who will be going through this tragic loss. But it will be important that we find out whether this is somebody who has died because they contracted COVID. And despite all of the new treatments that we have to protect people has continued to die anyway, in which case that is a real cause for concern, or whether this is somebody who had multiple other problems and actually it could have easily been a common cold, it could have been flu, it could have been anything else, and COVID is just one of the contributors to what could have been an otherwise completely natural end of a life.
Professor, I'm just looking, we mentioned those figures coming out of South Africa, and I can't vouch, I'm sure you can't vouch either, for the veracity and the rigour with which they're collected. It may have very different reporting systems, I'm sure it does, compared to the UK for a variety of reasons. But the latest figures I saw, and I think they're from today, of cases being up 119% in a week, hospital admissions up 141% in a week, but only 11 deaths. Now, it may be that the deaths are sadly a lagging indicator in this, but there may be, crumbs of hope there.
I mean, there are crumbs of hope, and we're all looking for this. We all hope that this is going to be the Christmas miracle that puts this pandemic to an end. However, it is important to say that the South African population is very different to our UK population. They are on average about 10 years younger, and that we do see discrepancies in the reporting. And the other thing, as I say, it is only 19 days since we first started talking seriously about the Omicron variant. It's 19 days today. Now, the median death rate after the Delta version was at 19 days. And remember, back then, we didn't have the wonderful treatments, the tocilizumab, the monoclonal antibodies, the antiviral therapy that we are now using. So the fact that there's been no deaths is really encouraging, but it's not enough for us yet to say, throw it all out the window and let's get on with things as usual. The other important thing to say is, even if it only causes half the number of cases or half the number of hospitalizations as a Delta variant, the fact that it's spreading through our population at this rate, the fact that people are being infected so commonly and so easily despite being double vaccinated, then even a small percentage of a very large number still becomes a large number that will stop other conditions. It will stop cancer treatments being received. It will stop heart attacks. It will stop all of those other things. So it's the knock-on effects that we're also worried about.
And actually, Professor, you make the point about the antivirals, and we've seen the amazing success pioneered by British scientists of things like of old treatments that suddenly learn new tricks like dexamethasone. And they're brilliant at keeping people alive who perhaps in the early stages of this pandemic may have died. But the problem is, I suppose, it's a wonderful problem to have, but that will potentially tie up resources in hospitals. Beds will be taken by people who will now live who would have died before, and that creates its own pressures.
It does, but one of the major focuses we've had over the recent months have been on therapies that have been designed to reduce the risk of getting sick in the first place. So for the immunocompromised, for people who are, let's say, have had a transplant or on a major therapies that stops them producing their own antibodies, we now have antibody therapies that were incredibly effective, about 70% reduction in the risk of hospitalization from the Delta variant. And again, British company GSK have announced that their monoclonal antibody, they're confident that that is going to be stopping the Omicron variant from causing people to be hospitalized. So there are those therapies that are stopping people getting sick in the first place for those who don't get all the benefit from vaccination. Now, it's important to say this is not an alternative to vaccination. This is not something that we can say, take this instead of vaccination. This is specifically for the individuals who are vaccinated, but their body doesn't mount a response, and therefore we can supplement that. And that is hopefully going to bring the length of stay down for those who do catch it despite being vaccinated, and then for even them make Christmas a rosier place.
Professor Strain, really appreciate your time this evening. Thanks a lot. After the break, a message to Matt Hancock on when it's time to give up insisting that public life in Britain can't cope without you.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. A bit of a three-way split with the weather tomorrow. Most places going to be dry and bright, but there will be some wet and windy weather in the northwest, and South at times likely to be a bit dull and dank. This wiggling, waving weather front's been bringing quite a wet day across parts of northwest England and Wales. It is slowly slipping southwards, so outbreaks of rain trickling into the Midlands and South Wales overnight and lasting most of the night here. Clearer skies for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and eastern Scotland, but then things turn wet and windy once more in the far northwest. Where we have the clearing skies, temperatures certainly in rural areas could drop down close to freezing, but we're a long way from that in the south. A very mild night here, but it will be quite a dank, drizzly, misty morning across much of the south, the Midlands and parts of South Wales. Rain on and off here. That should tend to fizzle out, so most places becoming dry. But a brighter day for northwest England compared to today in southern Scotland, Northern Ireland too. But there will be drizzly rain across western Scotland and very wet and windy across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. Quite mild here and again pretty mild across the south. During the evening, we'll start to see that rain pepping up and pushing south across the Highlands, down towards the central belt, and some rain heading into Northern Ireland. Again, further south, most places dry, but it could again turn quite misty and murky, with maybe the odd light shower across the south on Wednesday. Certainly rain at times for northwest England, southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a brighter day in the far north, the winds easing down, and we should see some sunny spells too for parts of the North Midlands and eastern England on Wednesday. Again, pretty mild, double digits for the majority. Now, it's going to stay largely dry beyond Wednesday, Thursday and into the weekend. Not much rain around at all, but often it will be fairly cloudy with light winds and increasing chance of seeing some thick fog patches too.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Well, I hold an unfashionable opinion about the majority of our MPs. I think most of them are not actually knaves and narcissists, but some of them are, and they do the rest huge reputational damage. I'm thinking of one MP in particular whose vanity and utter belief that public life in Britain can't possibly survive without him beggars credulity. He is Matt Hancock, who refuses to accept that no matter how low one star has fallen, there is always a way back into the parliamentary firmament. This summer, Mr. Hancock resigned as Health Secretary, shamed by the Sun newspaper, which had obtained pictures of him groping his mistress, even as he ordered the rest of us not to hug our dying grandparents. Less than 6 months later, and he's back in the papers. This was him on the red carpet this weekend. It wasn't a one-off. It's part of a public relations offensive aimed at his rehabilitation. It involves a degree of calculated masochism. Here he is on ITV last week. Well, time was when a disgraced politician disappeared from view and performed meaningful acts of contrition, rarely to return. Winston Churchill, for instance, unable to bear the shame of the failed Gallipoli campaign, volunteered to fight and very nearly die in the trenches. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Hancock, but volunteering to go on the sofa with Philip Schofield isn't quite the same thing. Mr. Hancock is still the MP for West Sussex, and ultimately, come the next election, it's for his electors to decide if they want to be represented by a man who so blatantly bid them do one thing while he was doing something else with a woman who was not his wife nor the mother of his children. By putting himself back under the spotlight, Mr. Hancock seems to think he's due another go. There's no doubting his ambition, and it's not a hopeless case. He's clever and hard-working. He has huge brand recognition. Google this year said his name was the most searched of any British politicians. But brass neck isn't everything. Notoriety shouldn't be confused with probity, even if it's easily mistaken for celebrity. Sometimes there is no way back into public life, and those with a bit more moral fibre to their character recognise that. I shouldn't think Owen Paterson, for instance, will ever stand for office again. Mr. Hancock would do well to take advice from another disgraced former Tory minister, Jonathan Aitken, who, like Hancock, once fancied himself a future Prime Minister, but who learned to let it all go. Jonathan Aitken is now a vicar, and it was as the Reverend Aitken that he said this a few years ago. Political graveyards are littered with the long-forgotten corpses of ex-future Prime Ministers. Any such label would make a wise man humble. In fact, it does quite the reverse. The combination of what Shakespeare in Hamlet calls the insolence of office, and in Macbeth, a vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself, gave me a surfeit of hubris. Pride is the deadliest of sins, and I was bursting with pride. Britain needs more people like Jonathan Aitken, for whom politics formed part of a journey of personal discovery that brought him to a true understanding of what public service really means. Matt Hancock, by contrast, seems determined to take only one lesson from his fall from grace: that we, the public, are politically callow and stupid, that our memories are short, and that he only needs to keep pushing to be allowed back into our affections. He's wrong, wrong, wrong. To Matt Hancock, I say, do an Aitken. Don't just glibly say you've learned from your mistakes. Prove it. Stay off the sofas. Give up the political power trip. Do something else with your life. That's the Brazier angle. Back to COVID. Parts of Britain seem to run out of lateral flow tests earlier today. An unflattering headline for the NHS, but perhaps encouraging evidence that many people are determined to take control of their own COVID status and offer reassurance to friends and colleagues. It's against that backdrop that I introduce our next story. If it is the case that we are more inclined to test ourselves, then picture this scenario. Imagine you could walk into a pharmacy and some 7 minutes later walk out knowing exactly how much immunity you physically have against coronavirus, a sort of antibody status check using a blood test. In other words, a test that could determine how much protection your body has against all variants of COVID, whether that's come from natural immunity, from previous infections, or indeed vaccinations that you've had. Well, a team of scientists from Exeter University have created such a new blood test because it measures antibody strength. It could allow us to categorise people by clinical need, not the cruder measure of their age. Well, the chief scientist behind this British breakthrough is Professor Andrew Shaw, CEO and founder of Atomarker Limited, Professor of Physical Chemistry at the University of Exeter. Professor, thanks so much for your time. We do appreciate it, and I know you've been struggling with some technical glitches, so thanks for your patience as well. What are you seeking to measure with this test?
Good evening, and thanks for having me. The test, as you said in the introduction, measures the number of antibodies absolutely in your blood. So you can see not just a relative number, not just a number that's on a lateral flow test, but an absolute number. It tells you that you've got 15 milligrams per litre or some such in your blood. And then you can see the differences. So I've got a below average AstraZeneca response to the vaccine, and I was boosted on Saturday. So I'm looking to see whether my antibody levels get up to a protective level. It's not clear what a protective level is yet, but if we're seeing booster responses between 15 and 100 milligrams per litre, what point is that protective? And then should we be treating the people differently with 15 milligrams per litre and certainly differently from 100 milligrams per litre? So I think we need to be more precise, more personalised about our interventions in the pandemic now.
It's wonderful. I mean, it could give people real agency in this, couldn't it? I mean, it's one thing for the government to say, OK, you have your booster jab and maybe we're up to 75% protection. They're dealing with mass generalisations, averages spread across, a cohort of millions potentially. What you're saying is, as an individual, you could know fairly precisely what your resistance is.
Yes, and I was giving a lecture recently where I asked the undergraduates electronically how many people in the room thought they had COVID, and 3 of them thought they did. So I'm standing at the front of the lecture theatre with a below average AstraZeneca response, thinking, what do I do? Do I carry on? I've got my mask off, and I know that 3 people in the room think they're infected. So I've moderated my behaviour. I didn't go on vacation on an aeroplane this year. I just took personal choices, personal judgments.
Professor, does it break it down insofar as you, with the reading that you have, is that a function of your natural immunity, natural resistance? I don't know whether you've had it, whether that's a function of having had it and having antibodies from having had COVID, or whether it's a function of the vaccination. Can you break it down according to where it's coming from, as it were?
There are lots of personal factors at work here. So the challenge from the vaccine generates antibodies in you as a person, and that's personal. Some people have, as I said, responded really well to the booster, for example, but some people are producing 10 times as many antibodies. That changes if you've had the infection. So we've seen people with the vaccine on top of the infection, and they were getting super responses to antibodies. Then it changes if you're immunocompromised. Maybe it's just naturally for you, you're a weak producer of antibodies, and you sort of need to know that. If you're immunocompromised because of a drug you're taking.
Professor, I hope we've still got... Oh, sorry, you just dropped out there, Professor. I was just... sorry, let me just pick up with a practical point, I suppose, which is to what extent you believe that people who I suppose have rather got used to this idea that if they want to know something about their COVID status will, shove a stick up their nose or the back of their tonsils or whatever it is. It's not as invasive as a blood test. And I wonder how many people really be willing to submit to a blood test to know what you've told them they can know.
I think the quality of the result is important. If you get a better answer through measuring something in your blood, and you get a more complete answer, more things simultaneously, a short period of time to get the result, I think that's a point of personal information that you get quickly, and it's worth the investment of time and the bit of blood that's needed to make the test work.
And anybody fascinated by what you've talked about this evening, wondering whether it's going to be commercially available, what's the time frame that we're looking at potentially?
It's on sale in some of our clinics at the moment. So if you go to our website, you can find the clinics that are open. And we can scale this up, and we're going to scale it up in the new year so that we can look at the pandemic as it evolves with Omicron. We're going to put Omicron spike protein on the test, so we'll be able to see what your immunity explicitly to Omicron might be. And we can track any future variants. So we really can be variant-proof.
Sounds fantastic. Professor Andrew Shaw from Exeter University, really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Now, the Mass celebrating the birth of Christ, you'll know it, perhaps better known as Christmas, recollects events in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. 100 years ago, 90% of those living in the Palestinian town where Jesus was born were Christian. Now only a handful remain. Why have they left? Well, many have faced persecution, which has worsened in recent years, as it has in other countries in the Middle East, like Syria and Iraq, where Islamists have tortured and murdered Christians for their faith. Well, today, Christian leaders in the Holy Land, the territory located between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, are warning that their communities are effectively on the point now of extinction. We're joined by the Anglican Archbishop in Jerusalem, Hossam Elias Naum. Archbishop, thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciated here on GB News.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's quite a claim to say that Christianity in the Holy Land, its birthplace, is on the point of extinction.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's a scary thing to think about. And as we know, this is the birthplace of Christianity, and one of the most ancient places where Christians, been worshipping in this space. And it is really quite scary to think about the Jerusalem and Bethlehem and many other places without its living stones, Christians in the Middle East.
It's hard to imagine. I mean, I think we're just seeing some pictures. There's pictures of Bethlehem. But if you think about, I worked in Jerusalem for several months and went to Bethlehem, but also went to places like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is a separate case in a sense, isn't it? It's hard to imagine that Christianity would be allowed to wither on the vine in the old city of Jerusalem, home to those important religious Christian sites as it is. But that's a very different story from what's happening, for instance, elsewhere in Israel, Palestine, where communities are leaving. And I just wonder, Archbishop, when we talk about persecution, are these people who just think this is not a place for me and my family long term? I'm going to join the diaspora, the Christian diaspora of Palestinians living, I don't know, in Canada or wherever? Or is it something more tangibly persecution? Are these people being hounded in their homes, being encouraged to leave, being beaten up, facing violence? What is it?
It's not that, the situation in Jerusalem specifically, and of course we've been seeing people exodus of Christians from Jerusalem and other places, and because of the pressures that they really imposed on them, and mainly from the radical groups, and especially here in Jerusalem, we are witnessing more and more pressures from these extremists and radicals, and especially if we talk about Jerusalem, Jerusalem has a very special character where Christians, Muslims and Jews live side by side. But at the same time, we see that, Christians, and especially in the old city, facing, these pressures from extremists, and especially looking at their holy sites and their properties and their churches. And this is what it is really kind of a bit challenging for us to think about, and losing our young people specifically, those who are immigrating. And now we are less than 1% in Jerusalem, whereas 100 years ago we were over 15%. And therefore, to think about the exodus of Christians and the migration is something that especially at these times of Christmas and as we celebrate Easter, these are the very birthplace of Christianity and where Jesus died and rose again. And we can't imagine the Holy Land without its living stones, without those people who are witnessing to these very important stories that we read in the Bible, and yet these living stones need to kind of steadfast and have resilience. But at the same time, law enforcement is really important in order to preserve, the presence of Christians in Jerusalem.
I just wonder, Archbishop, if it's true at all that, say, you're walking through around the old city of Jerusalem, do you actually feel threatened now, or are we still far short of something like that?
No, it's not about being threatening as a person. What we face, in Jerusalem is that, whether it is thugs or, organized groups, trying to kind of impose pressure on those who are different from them. You have, as I said, the wonderful character of Jerusalem. Whereas, extremists don't see this as a blessing. The Christians, witness to not only peace building and reconciliation, but also support through their organizations, through their institutions, whether it's schools and hospitals, and the contribution of Christians, to the wider community is really important, because Christians bring the voice of moderation and the values of coexistence and living together and tolerance through these institutions. And also at the same time, it is important to note that there are so many tourists and pilgrims who come to Jerusalem and to Bethlehem. And we are really kind of helping not only the economy, but also helping, in preserving the character of Jerusalem for the three monotheistic faiths. And this is really important for us to continue to preserve the character of Jerusalem, and especially the old city.
Archbishop, I just wonder how much events, not a million miles away from Israel, in Syria and in Iraq, and particularly those places on the plains of Nineveh, where there were ancient Christian communities that were expunged by the terrorists of ISIS, of Islamic State. I just wonder to what extent that changed the game, that changed the calculation, that raised the level of hostility and threat for Christians in the Holy Land.
We know that, the Middle East is kind of, it's interconnected altogether. And we know, these waves of extremism that happen in our region, of course, one affects the other. And that's why, it is important that, these places, whether it is Iraq or Syria and Jerusalem, Palestine, we and Israel, we know that, these places were always a model and absolutely an example of living together. And, we have lived together as Jews, Christians, and Muslims for over 14 centuries. This is not something new, but unfortunately, we know and we experience these extremists who are come with different agendas, using and manipulating religion for the sake of a certain political agenda. And that's why we are so concerned about that. Religions always speak about tolerance, and we know how much goodness there is in Islam, there is in Judaism and Christianity. But unfortunately, when it comes to extremists and exclusion, this is when things become really tough for the Christian community, especially I'm talking as a Christian, of course.
Archbishop, we very much appreciate your time this evening. We wish you a happy Christmas. Thank you very much indeed. After the break, the spy who came in from the cab. How former KGB agent turned President Vladimir Putin was once an unlikely taxi driver.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, what can be done to stop Plan B being voted through? I'll issue a special plea to Tory MPs in my digest, and then we'll debate tomorrow's vaccine passport rebellion in the clash. Could the drive for booster jabs spark a new cancer crisis? Positive Professor Carol Sikora weighs in. Has COVID exposed Keir Starmer's failings as the leader of no opposition? GB News star Neil Oliver thinks so. He'll be here in The Outsider. How can Boris Johnson save his premiership? Tory grandee David Mellor offers advice to the PM. Plus, I'll break down today's top stories with Monday's Superstar panel, A State of Fear author Laura Dodsworth, senior reporter at the iNewspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and the social commentator Esther Kraku. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. What's eating Vladimir Putin? Sometimes it seems like the Russian leader wakes up each morning and rededicates himself to rubbing up the West the wrong way. Well, we now know why that might be. At the weekend, an interview with Putin was broadcast in Russia. In it, he repeated what he'd said before, that he felt embittered and angry about the collapse of his beloved Soviet Union in the early 1990s. But this wasn't just a cool-headed, dispassionate analysis from a former KGB officer, which Putin was before the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was personal. He told an interviewer that when the USSR broke up, he lost his high-powered communist job and, for a while, took to driving a taxi. Nothing wrong with driving a taxi, it's just a long way from the image Putin normally cultivates, the jet fighter pilot who presents himself as a military strongman or an action man of the Russian steppe, fishing for pike, showing off his wrestler's physique. His wrestler's physique, I should say, or even stripping to the waist and riding like a Cossack warrior of old. You, like me, were expecting all those words to be accompanied by pictures. Well, so does this tell us something new about a man who, let us not forget, has the power to send nuclear missiles to destroy our homes at the press of a button? Joining me now, Russian security expert and author of We Need to Talk About Putin, Mark Galeotti. Mark, thanks ever so much for joining us. We've been trying to get you on for a while, so I'm delighted to see you here with us. It's a fascinating story, this.
It is. We need to treat it with a little bit of caution, though, because in the past, he had said times were so hard that he considered working as a cabbie. So it might be that he's just decided, and I know it's strange to think of politicians doing this, gilding the lily just to look a little bit more like a man of the people. But
Mark,
the second thing is...
Yeah, you go.
So the second thing is, look, I mean, at that time, everyone, in effect, was a freelance cabbie. You would just stand by the road, put out your hand, and someone would pull up and you'd negotiate something.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I was hoping you wouldn't knock down the story till later on in the interview, but it's a fair point, given what he said before. What it reminds us of, and you conjure up an image there where anybody with a battered old larder would park up near the airport or whatever and just offer lifts to people, is just how almost on the point of anarchy early 1990s Moscow and elsewhere was. And that collapse of the Soviet Union, we can say this with conviction, can't we? He feels personally.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, in a way, it's really his generation. I think we see, I mean, the cronies and people around him generally are the same sort of background. A lot of them are ex-KGB, very much the same age, sort of between about 68 and 72. And these are the people who really, they thought they knew the way the world was going. They were young members of the Soviet elite. They had glittering careers, and then bang, the whole system collapsed around them. And I think this is one of the problems we have today, because it's not just that they're thinking, what did we lose? But that has metastasized into, and who took it from us? There's still, I mean, Putin talking today about sort of CIA agents who are involved in trying to rip Russia down and so forth. It has become quite an unpleasant, toxic kind of perspective.
Is there not, Mark, a little, I mean, you know far better than most of us, but was there not a little bit of truth in the idea that in the early 1990s, it did become a kind of Klondike, a Wild West for certain, speculative interests? If you want to make a quick buck, there's some money to be made taking down those old nationalised industries. There's value to be extracted.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I think the problem is that Putin really regards as conspiracy what was just basically opportunism. Absolutely. People are out there to see what money they could get and to basically try and almost use Russia as a test lab for their theories. We saw that with a whole bunch of Harvard economists, for example. And frankly, we've got to recognize that we actually handled Russia really badly in the 1990s. It doesn't excuse what's happening today. But no, it's not as though Putin and the people around him don't have at least some grounds for feeling that they were hard done by in that rather miserable decade.
It's fascinating, Mark, and for some people, I mean, there were some people listening to this, who weren't even born then. But what should the West have done that would have been a better way of operating with that failing state where leadership vanished? And it, as you say, it became a kind of laboratory for some people who wanted to impose, some sort of the ideas of Milton Friedman on a country which had been used to hardcore communism.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, we weren't going to be in a position to do something like the Marshall Plan to kind of rebuild the Russian economy and the economy of the other post-Soviet states. But we did pretty much kind of neglect them, to be honest. And to an extent, we also didn't practice what we preach. I mean, we were so worried, understandably, about the Communist Party coming back, that when in 1993, for example, Boris Yeltsin shelled his own parliament because of a constitutional dispute, technically speaking, that was in total breach of the constitution, but because we didn't want the communists coming back, we turned a blind eye. In 1996, Boris Yeltsin rigged an election to make sure that the communists didn't come back. We turned a blind eye to that. This is the thing. We really should remember that if we actually want to uphold democracy, that means accepting that sometimes people whom we don't like are going to win the vote.
Is there something a bit cruder at work, though, Mark? I mean, we put up with a lot from Boris Yeltsin, not least the fact that he was drunk for a substantial part of the time, even as he clutched up the nuclear briefcase. That, might is always right, or at least might is always, given a wide berth. This may have been a failing state, but it still had a lot of nuclear silos with coordinates for where I live and maybe where you live too, plugged in.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, again, I mean, I'm not saying that the poor Russians were entirely the victims here and that we were the bad guys. But I just think we have to appreciate the extent to which, when someone like Putin talks about the glory days of the Soviet Union, he's not talking about the ideology. What he misses was the days of Soviet power. And this is really what he's trying to rebuild. He's trying to go almost a sort of, shall I say, a Soviet Union without the communism, with all that kind of global power, without any of this sort of Marxist-Leninist nonsense. So, and I think, going back to your point, yeah, we had to worry about all those missiles and so forth. But the trouble is, because we mishandled it then, we're dealing with a Russia that still has those missiles and has a actually worryingly competent army, and yet also feels hard done by. They got this idea that we only listen to them when they cause us problems. And that's really what Putin is doing right now. He's causing us problems because he wants to say, you have to deal with me. You have to deal with my concerns.
Mark, you introduced some doubt about what his motives were in describing being a taxi driver. But I'm curious, and maybe our viewers will be too, about what he's clearly curating an image to the Russian people. We just flashed up some pictures a moment ago of him fishing for pike. And we've all, we remember the pictures of him as a fighter pilot standing by the tiger that had been shot. The real kind of action man, Vladimir Putin. Why is he doing it? I mean, is it vanity, do we think? He's a KGB officer. This won't be about vanity. It'll be about calculation, won't it?
Well, look, we should never rule out vanity with a politician. Particularly, I mean, yes, he was a KGB officer. He wasn't a very good one. I mean, interestingly, we actually have some of his declassified personnel records, which basically make him a kind of a solid B+. He's definitely not one of the high flyers. In some ways, this is his chance to really sort of reconstruct his image. But also, again, I mean,
interference from Moscow. I think, Mark, we've lost your signal. Mark Galeotti, we're going to leave it there. You've just dropped out. Thanks very much indeed, Mark Galeotti, on Vladimir Putin's career or not as a taxi driver in Moscow. The SNP-led government in Scotland is facing a torrent of criticism tonight for an act of social engineering that has left women's groups dumbfounded. The Harry Potter author, J.K. Rowling, is amongst those who've denounced a legislative change that puts rape victims in an extraordinary legal position. It will mean that from this summer coming, I should say, detectives in Scotland will be able to record a rape as being committed by a woman if the attacker identifies as a female, even if the alleged rapist has male genitalia. Andrew Doyle is here with me. Andrew, not for the first time, we're talking about a degree of wokeness coming out of the SNP government in Edinburgh, which shocks, but you're going to correct me about something.
No, absolutely. No, I think that's absolutely right. The SNP have been doing this for a long time, is that they have completely bought into the notion of gender identity ideology, and they are trying to change the law so that they are reducing the medical checks that are necessary for someone to change gender and to acquire the gender recognition certificate that they seek.
The way I'd written that introduction makes it sound as if this law has just been enacted. It's not. Right. It's due to come in the summer.
That's right.
It's been around for a little while.
It's a longer process, and there've been protests as well. You'll remember there were groups of feminists outside of Holyrood who were protesting about the implications of gender self-identification. And again, it's really important to emphasise what this is about. People are not saying that someone shouldn't have the right to identify however they like, or to do whatever they want with their body, or to change their body, or to change their appearance, anything. This is not what people are saying. What they're saying is that if you institute a new law that says that you can simply declare yourself to be the opposite sex without medical checks,
certificate from
yeah, exactly. If you can just simply do that and therefore gain access to women-only spaces such as prisons, such as domestic violence refuge centres, such as single-sex accommodation in hospitals, all of these kind of things, then that does present a security safeguarding risk to women and girls. That's what people are saying. This is getting conflated. The SNP have handled this appallingly, because what they tend to do is, instead of engaging with people and saying, let's listen to your concerns, they will demonise anyone who presents a counter view, and that's been happening to feminists a lot. So this is just the latest of a series of events that have happened, but this one is particularly egregious because we see this and we're like, so the police are now going to be recording women as rapists, whereas by law, of course, you need to have male genitalia in order to rape. And that means that all rapists by law are men. So this idea that they're going to do this is baffling to most people. It's absolutely not helpful. And as you've seen, J.K. Rowling has tweeted about this. And of course, inevitably, you've had a massive stir about this. There's the tweet: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. The penest individual who raped you is a woman. And it's interesting that
George Orwell.
Yes, exactly. So it's invoking a literary reference there to 1984, making the very, very clear case that we are in Orwellian territory now, when government bodies are denying biological reality, are expecting us to go along with and to express views that we know not to be true. That's authoritarian.
I've got to say, Andrew, I feel the need to sort of put my hands up as a journalist and say I think our industry, not yours, my industry, has rather let down a lot of Scots, because this has only come to light. I think it was The Sun on Sunday were reporting that a former SNP minister, Justice Minister, who's now in Alex Salmond's party, had written to Police Scotland for clarification on this. That shouldn't be how this sort of thing comes out. I mean, yes, it's good. I'm glad the Sun the Scottish Sun managed to get this story, but it feels a very odd way to go around something of critical importance to the wider public.
But I think a lot of elements of the media don't consider this to be all that important, because they too have bought...
Or Scotland, frankly.
Or Scotland is in a particular state when it comes to this stuff, because they have bought in to this ideological worldview, which most people do not share. Yeah. And there's this strange corollary that comes along with this worldview, which is this sense in which anyone who challenges it must be doing so from a position of bigotry and evil and hate. And that's absolutely not the case. I mean, it might be the case in a few cases, but in virtually all cases, it is absolutely not. And we have the same situation in the UK generally, where women can appear in court if they've been sexually assaulted, and they are expected to use the pronouns that their attacker wants them to use. So if a woman has been raped, she will have to refer to her attacker as she, and she can be in contempt of court if she doesn't. Now, I think when you use pronouns that people want to use and names that people want them to use, you are doing so out of courtesy, and it's your choice whether you do that or not. But I'm not sure we should be extending courtesy to rapists. I hate to say it. I don't see why we should be doing that. I don't see why we should be worried about the police misgendering someone if they've committed an act of sexual assault. Maybe they should have thought of that before they did that.
Let's just got a couple of minutes for another story that caught my eye today. Actually, a couple of days ago, The Guardian reporting that police forces in the UK will put up their hands and say we are institutionally racist, a phrase that was coined under the Macpherson report, under the inquiry into the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Why?
Well, there is you must have noticed there's a bit of a fashion for doing this at the moment. Corporations are doing it, universities are doing it, they're putting their hands up, schools are doing it, saying we are institutionally racist. Now, it is perfectly possible for an institution to have practices and elements built into the system that are racist, and those always need to be addressed. But often when people are making this declaration, it is merely performative because it is perceived to be the thing that people want to hear. When Princeton University did this the other year, the Department of Education in America said, well, maybe we won't fund you. Maybe we'll have to launch an investigation because, of course, racism is illegal, right? So, and then Princeton had to backtrack and say, well, we don't really mean that we're racist, but we are racist. They put themselves in an impossible bind because they don't really mean it. Now, if the police are going to say, if there are racist, institutional racist and systemic racist policies in the police force, I want to know about them and I want them ironed out. But I want to know who put them there and why. The truth is, there may not be. There may not be. I mean, they seem to be suggesting that their staff are racist and their policies are racist, but they don't really mean it. This is my problem with it. Like I say, if there are racist practices going on in the police force, there's no place for it and it has to be dealt with. But if they're simply making a declaration that we are institutionally racist in order to appease activists and protesters, then I don't see the point of that. And I don't actually think it's going to help race relations. So I think in all of these cases, let's have a conversation about the possibility of institutional racism, the possibility of systemic racism, but that should be the start of a conversation, followed by an investigation and interrogation. But at the moment, it's being used as a conclusion. It's been taken entirely on faith. And the police are making this declaration from a faith-based position without looking into it, because they think that's what they are expected to do. I don't think it's helpful. And I think it's a very complicated issue that requires more nuance and not less.
Well, you always bring that nuance to the conversation, Andrew. Thanks very much indeed. I've just been tweeting out the fact that Time magazine, every year towards the end of the year, they'll declare who their person of the year is. Do you know who it is this year?
No, I don't.
Elon Musk. Space billionaire Elon Musk.
Okay.
We've had a few people writing in with their suggestions. I'm afraid to say neither of our names have made the short.
I thought you were going to say Vladimir Putin because of his topless photos fishing.
Very unlikely. You call a cab for Andrew Doyle. Thanks very much indeed. Dan Wootton is next. Do stand by. More news coming up.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. A bit of a three-way split with the weather tomorrow. Most places going to be dry and bright, but there will be some wet and windy weather in the northwest and the south at times likely to be a bit dull and dank. This wiggling, waving weather front's been bringing quite a wet day across parts of northwest England and Wales. It is slowly slipping southwards, so outbreaks of rain trickling into the Midlands and South Wales overnight and lasting most of the night here. Clearer skies for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and eastern Scotland, but then things turn wet and windy once more in the far northwest. Where we have the clearing skies. Temperatures, certainly rural areas, could drop down close to freezing, but we're a long way from that in the south. A very mild night here, but it will be quite a dank, drizzly, misty morning across much of the south, the Midlands and parts of South Wales. Rain on and off here. That should tend to fizzle out, so most places becoming dry. But a brighter day for northwest England compared to today in southern Scotland, Northern Ireland too. But there will be drizzly rain across western Scotland and very wet and windy across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. Quite mild here and again pretty mild across the south. During the evening, we'll start to see that rain pepping up and pushing south across the Highlands, down towards the central belt, and some rain heading into Northern Ireland. So again, further south, most places dry, but it could again turn quite misty and murky, with maybe the odd light shower across the south on Wednesday. Certainly rain at times for northwest England, southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a brighter day in the far north, the winds easing down, and we should see some sunny spells too for parts of the North Midlands and eastern England on Wednesday. Again, pretty mild, double digits for the majority. Now, it's going to stay largely dry beyond Wednesday, Thursday and into the weekend. Not much rain around at all, but often it will be fairly cloudy with light winds and increasing chance of seeing some thick fog patches too.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so